Well, it's been a long journey, hasn't it? It feels fast, but it feels also long. We started here 3 Friday nights ago, and by this time tomorrow, we're all done. And if you have joined us the whole time, then you qualify to receive the honorary title of Masterclass Graduate. Wow, one person was impressed by that. Our last topic on Sunday night, for those who were here, was the topic of the divine rescue plan. Does anybody remember that topic from Sunday night? Let me see your hands if you remember. Excellent. Now, I won't quiz you, I will tell you. The conclusion of that presentation was this, that God loves you so much that He has done everything to guarantee that you will be with Him forever. But you need to choose. That was the conclusion of our presentation on Sunday night. Now, that's great if you're alive. Yes or no? Because when you're alive, you have the power to choose. But in this faith experiment that I was going through, when I came to this point of going, hey, God wants to rescue people, this is fantastic, this is amazing. I was 23 years of age, and then it hit me that there were people in my life who were no longer living. They had died. And my question turned to, well, this is great for people who are alive and get to know this and get to make decisions, but what about the people who are dead? Because then the question is, what happens when you die? My grandfather died in 1997. This was about 4 years before I found this faith journey thing that I shared last Friday night. And I remember being at his funeral in Sydney, and my cousins were there, my father and his 2 sisters and their spouses, and we're standing there, as I'm sure you've all experienced a funeral before, most of you at least. And I remember standing there, and my grandfather claimed to believe in the Bible. And yet, he was diagnosed with cancer, bowel cancer. And he had 2 years of fighting cancer, and then he died at 62 or 63. I forget how old he was. Very young. And I remember standing there watching the casket go down. They were throwing the roses on the casket as it drops down into the ground. And I remember standing there looking at that, thinking this question: how is it that he gave his whole life to following a God and believing this book, and yet that God let him die? And then the question is, where's he gone now? Is he off celebrating somewhere, and we're the ones that actually got the raw end of the deal? Or is he gone into some purgatory type place of limbo, or Never Land? Or is he actually going to come back as some sort of cat or mouse or bird or something? Or is that it? As an atheist, I said, well, that's it. You go into that hole, and this is my thought. I hope I don't upset anybody, but I thought you just become worm food. That's an atheistic view. And so tonight, we are exploring this topic of beyond the grave. What happens when we die, according to the book that we've been looking at? And you'll notice I put a subtitle there. It says, Facing Death Without What? Now that's bold, isn't it? Facing death without fear. That's bold. Because all of us have something that desires to live, and the idea of that ending sounds fearful. But I want to suggest once again, from the opening night of our Masterclass series, we looked at this book and we said that about 40% of this book, so about that much of the book, is what? Do you remember? What category is it? It's prophecy. There's 1,817 prophecies in the Bible, making up about 40% of the book. The purpose of that, we've seen, is to show that this book is written by who it claims to be written by. The question then is, what's in the remaining 60% of the book? And what we're going to cover tonight is a part of that 60%. It's the information that God wants you to know now that you believe that there's evidence that He exists. Does that make sense? So with that being said, let's jump into it. When I was a teenager, there was a show on TV called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. When I was a little boy, I used to watch after school on TV a show called Bewitched. Then in the mornings, there used to be cartoons called Casper the Friendly Ghost. All these different shows, and all of them had a very common theme, and that was that when you die, you're not really dead. And so the question we want to ask tonight are things like this. Are ghosts, Casper the ghost or ghosts in general, are the dead contacting the living? Is that what ghosts are about? What about out-of-body experiences? I've met some people who have claimed that they've nearly died or died clinically, and then they left their bodies and they remember it. What's the meaning of an out-of-body experience? When I was a kid in primary school, up at a place called Esk, there was a haunted house that all of us primary school kids knew was haunted. And when we walked to the bus stop, we had to run past the haunted house. What are haunted houses? Well, in our mind, it was because there were ghosts in the house, and the ghosts were people who died. Is that what this book teaches? And if so, how do we understand it? I lived in the United States for a number of years, and there's a graveyard in Virginia, and there's a tombstone in that graveyard in Virginia, and this is what it says. I'll zoom in for you. It says, "Farewell, my friends, I love so dear. I've gone and left this vale of tears. My end you know, my grave you see. Prepare yourself to follow me." I thought that was very clever. But what had happened was somebody who was even more clever than this, they wrote a reply. And this is what the reply says. "To follow you, I'm not content until I know just where you went." And isn't that the question that all of us ask at some point in our life? Where do we go? Do we go anywhere after death? Some people believe that if you do the right thing, you go up to the harp playing place. But if you don't do enough right things, you end up in the barbecuing section. Hell. Other people believe in this idea that we just get older and older and older, we die, and then we come back into a rebirth, and we come back and we come back again. That's what this infinite symbol here is, which is the concept of reincarnation. We just keep reincarnating this spiritual realm. And then there are other people who say that death is just like sleep. You go to sleep and you don't know anything. Is there life after death? This was the question that I asked my 23-year-old self when I started this exploration. And the question is, can we really connect with the dead? Can we make contact with the dead? Is it even possible? I have met people who have told me that they have the ability to call up the dead. You name it, they can call them up. I've met people that claim this. Can we actually find hope? We've been looking at this book. We've talked about, I noticed The Last Empire is completely gone tonight. It was getting smaller over time, but if you were here the first night, we had a big bunch of flowers here and a big bunch of flowers over here. And we said this was creation, the beginning. And down here, this is the last empire. This is the desire of the ages. And we've tracked through all the way through history and prophecy. We came down here to that last segment, and we looked at Rabbi Jesus, and he taught us about those signs, those 5 categories of signs that are leading us to that last point of that last empire. And if you remember, the last empire is categorized not by the size of your house, not by the comfort of your bed, or the speed of your spaceship. It talks nothing of those things. The one thing it tells us is there will be no more death. And so everything in this trajectory is to get to this point of this last empire where there's no more death. Death is solved. The problem of death is solved. And so we want to ask ourselves tonight, what does this book talk about hope beyond the grave? We're going to start by going to the story of Rabbi Jesus dealing with things that he commonly dealt with, which was pain and suffering. And in the chapter of the 11th chapter of John, we find that Jesus is standing there with his friends. He's healing people. And in the middle of that, he takes a rest with his followers. We call them disciples. And as he's standing there with his followers, along comes a messenger breaking through the scene. And he has a message directly for Jesus. And the message says, Jesus, your friend Lazarus is sick. Come right now. Now, Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. And Lazarus has two sisters, Mary and Martha, who are also friends of Jesus. They lived in a town called Bethany, which is about 3 miles, 6 kilometers away from where Jesus was. This is what it says. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister, which is Mary, and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was what? Sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. That's a really bizarre way to read a piece of information. It starts by saying, now Jesus loved them, but when he was told that they were sick, he didn't move. You would think that if Jesus loved them, he received the message, what would he do? He would get up and go because they're sick. After all, Jesus has just been healing sick people. But notice what it says. It says he stayed where he was for 2 more days. The next part of the story is we get to the 4th day since he received the message, or since Lazarus was sick. And this is what happens. Jesus decides, I'm going to get up now and I'm going to go to the Bethany where Lazarus is. Now, the interesting thing in the story is that when Jesus gets there, we find the shortest verse in the entire Bible. It's 2 words. And here are the words. Jesus wept. When he saw the scene, he saw the suffering, he saw the crying, he saw the disbelief in who he was as Messiah, he wept. Now, remember, he chose to stay for 4 days before he shows up. Now, when he gets there, he meets Martha. It says, now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been where? Here, my brother would not have what? You see, what's happened in those 4 days that Jesus received the message 4 days ago, it said, Lazarus is sick. Now Jesus finds out, no, he's actually dead. And Jesus stayed for 4 days, and now Martha's upset. She's really upset. Some of you have been upset like this. Have you ever? I've heard many people say this. I'm sure you're one of them. I was angry with God. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? We're the creation and we're angry with the Creator. But it's a human experience. She is it's describing here a picture that she's upset with Jesus in a very particular way, because she's saying, if you had have been here 4 days ago when he was sick, you could have healed him and stopped him from dying. Sometimes we blame ourselves when people die. I knew a parent whose child got run over. And they said, if only I had have held their hand, they wouldn't have died. Or if only I had have given the medicine faster, they wouldn't have died. We blame everyone, but ultimately we blame God. And so here is a human experience saying, Lord, if you had have been here, my brother would not have died. This is the feeling that a lot of us have. We've seen too much pain and suffering, and we go, well, if God is so good, then why do bad things happen? We answered that question a couple of nights ago. Remember that enemy in that great cosmic conspiracy? There is an enemy that is against God, but the story continues. Jesus said to Martha, he said, your brother will, what's that word, everybody? Will rise again. Now, is it clear in your mind in the story that according to what Martha has communicated to Jesus, Lazarus is dead? But Jesus now turns to Martha and says, hey, your brother will rise again. So in Jesus' teaching here, does Jesus project the idea that there is hope beyond death? Yes. But watch this. Martha said to him, I know he's going to rise again. I know there's hope. Look what she says though. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection that's the end of the world. I know he will rise again. I read the Bible. I know the story, but that's at the end of the world. That doesn't help my tears now. It doesn't help my relationship being broken with my brother now. And Jesus responds. He said to her, I am Now, in English, we have I am because it's the only way it makes sense. But in Greek, this I am translated literally would be I am. Two I's. And the only other place that appears in the entire Bible is in the Hebrew language when Moses shows up on the Mount, Sinai mountain, and he says to the burning bush, he says, "Who are you? What's your name?" And he says, I am, which is another way to say Jehovah. And so Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And then he continues, he says, "He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall" what? He shall live. "And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." And then he asks a very pointed question: do you believe this? Now, if I was there, I would go, never die? Excuse me, Jesus, never die? My brother Lazarus believed in you and he's dead. What do you mean he will never die for those who believe in you? Jesus is talking about something big. Big. Bigger than our possible imagination. Let's rewind back now and see how the story played out from Jesus' perspective. We go back 4 days, back to the moment he received the message. Remember the message? Lazarus, your friend is sick. Let's go back to that moment. Jesus turned to his friends and he said, "Our friend Lazarus sleeps." What did he say? He sleeps. "But I go that I may wake him up." That makes good sense. If somebody is asleep and you want to have a conversation with them, what do you got to do? Wake him up. So Jesus says, look, our friend, we've been told he's sick. He's asleep. I'm going to go and wake him up. Watch this. Then his disciples said, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well." I love these disciples. They're kind of like us. We think we know everything. See, there's a principle. If you're sick and you rest, you'll get better. So Jesus, just let him sleep. However, Jesus spoke of his what, everyone? Death. Clearly in Jesus' mind, he says Lazarus is asleep, but he means that Lazarus is what, everyone? Dead. Notice this. But they thought that he was talking about taking rest in sleep. So Jesus had to really do what Jesus does well. He had to say it plainly. This is what it says next. Then Jesus said to them, what, everyone? Plainly, Lazarus is dead. So in Jesus' mind, he is connecting or calling the experience of death to the equivalence of sleep. Lazarus is asleep. He's dead. The great thing with being asleep is you always wake up. Because if you don't wake up, you're dead. So Jesus is saying, hey, this death thing, it's sleep. And I'm going to go now to where he is asleep, dead, and I'm going to what? Wake him up. So why does Jesus make the whole point of this death thing? Well, here's what it says by the king Solomon, wisest king. He says this. He says, "The living know that they shall die, but the dead know what? Nothing. And they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now," what, everyone? "Perished." So even 1,000 years before Jesus comes on the scene, this Old Testament book, or the Torah of the day, it claims that when a person dies, they know what? Nothing. And everything they have, their love, their hatred, that's their emotions and their passion, it is perished, meaning it's not there anymore. And then it continues on, and we look at the story of Job, the first book written in the entire Bible. It says, if a man dies, his sons come to honor. That sounds nice, doesn't it? He's dead, he's at the funeral, the sons come to honor him at the funeral, but look at this. And he, who's he? The dead guy, does not what? He doesn't know it. Why not? Because the dead know nothing. You see, it's the whole reason it's called sleep. I travel a lot, and I often fall asleep. Not driving, but I fall asleep. I was on a plane last night coming in from Melbourne. Got in here at 11 o'clock last night. And before the plane taxied down the runway in Melbourne, I was asleep. And the next thing I remember was being bumped by the hostess saying, "Do you want a drink or something?" I was like, wow, I looked at my clock. It'd been 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I can't even remember it. So for that time that I was asleep, I knew nothing. I didn't even know he took off. Man dies, he knows nothing. They are brought low, meaning that the family is crying, they're mourning. But look at this. But he does not perceive it. That's good. The loved one that's perished and has no more knowledge of it, they don't go, "Oh, this is so much pain I'm causing all my loved ones." They don't even know that you're mourning. Now, we need to mourn, don't get me wrong, because it's a part of our experience in this fallen condition. But the reason it's called sleep is because the dead know what? Nothing. But someone will say, as I used to say, because even though I wasn't religious, I'd seen enough movies and TV to know that when you die, you go to heaven, right? Well, that's what everyone tells me in the movies. When you're dead, you go to heaven. So someone will say, but Robbie, that contradicts my whole worldview on what happens when a person dies. When they die, they go to heaven if they're good, and if they're not, they go to the bad place. Well, let's have a look at this. King David, in the book of Psalms, he said this. He said, "The dead do not," what's that word? Praise the Lord. "Nor any who go down into silence," meaning go into the grave. People who go into the grave, what don't they do, everyone? You can leave here with certainty that a person who has died and gone down to the grave has not done this one thing. What is it? Praise the Lord. Now, wouldn't you think, all the stories we've been told, that when you die and you go to heaven, what do you get? You get a harp. I don't know where this is in the Bible, but that's what we're told. You've seen the little cartoons, right? Roadrunners chasing along after someone, coyote or whoever it is, and then they get a rock fall on their head. The next thing, their bodies start floating up in the sky. They get a little halo, get a little harp, and they start playing in the clouds. That's what we're taught. Now, David wrote the longest book in the Bible about praise to God. Surely, if someone's going to die and praise God, it's going to be King David. But he writes, no. The dead don't praise the Lord. Now, keep David in mind. We'll jump down about 1,000 or so years to a day called Pentecost, which takes place 40 days after Jesus' resurrection. This is what happens. On the day of Pentecost, Peter, he gets bold and he stands up and he wants to tell the Jewish people about Jesus and how he was the holy man, the Messiah. This is what Peter says. He says, "Men and brethren," speaking to the Jewish people of the day, "let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David." That's the David that we just read from. The dead do not praise who? The Lord. They don't go down in silence, nothing happens. He said, "Let me speak freely of the patriarch David, that he is both," what, everyone? "He is dead and buried, and his tomb is with us where? To this day." Now, this was right after Jesus dies and resurrects. Peter goes, "Listen, let me tell you something. David is dead, no duh, 1,000 years have gone by since he died, and he's buried, and his tomb is still with us." In fact, if you go to Jerusalem today, you can visit what is believed, we don't know if it's for sure, but they believe this is the tomb of David. And people come there and pay their respects. But Peter continues and he says this. He says, "For David did not ascend into the what?" Now you go, "I think because he was a bad dude. Remember he did that naughty thing?" No. That's not why he didn't go to heaven. He didn't go to heaven because he died. And when you die, you go into the grave. And when you go into the grave, you sleep and you do not praise who? Because you don't have nothing. The dead know nothing. So it continues on. Job says this, first book of the Bible, written. "So man lies down and does not" what, everyone? This is talking about death. They lay down into death. They don't rise back up till the heavens are what, everyone? No more. They will not awake nor be roused from their. This is the Old Testament. One thing you will find consistent on this teaching about what happens when a person dies, it's consistent from the first book to the last book of the 66 books of the Bible. And it's consistently called, say it with me, sleep. Job, the first book of the Bible, they will lay down, they will not rise up, and nothing can wake them out of their sleep until the heavens are no more. Have you looked outside? Looked up? It's still there because something hasn't changed yet. So the question is, when will they wake up? We just saw from Job's account that when the heavens are no more. But let's turn to the New Testament, to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, he went to a place called Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki, which is in Greece today. And when he went there, he wanted to share the good news of Jesus. And he was there for 3 Sabbaths. Remember we talked about the Sabbath gift last week? He was there for 3 Sabbaths, and he told the people about this person, Jesus, the holy man, who has the power to save. And as a result of 3 weekends of teaching and preaching in the city of Thessalonica, there was a new congregation formed called the Church in Thessaloniki. By the 4th week, all the pagan people there got really upset with him because people were moving away from the idols and things, and they ran him out of town and he had to leave. So the church is left there with 3 weeks of instruction. And so the church had clearly misunderstood some of the teachings, and you couldn't learn everything in 3 weeks, obviously. And so they had a belief that you had to be alive when Jesus returns in the clouds for you to be saved. And so the problem is that people were sick and elderly people were still dying. And so they were trying to keep these people awake and alive until Jesus returns so they can be saved. So they start writing a letter to Paul saying, Paul, what's the deal? How can we keep these people from being lost because Jesus hasn't come back yet and they're getting sick and dying? So Paul's like, what? So he writes a letter. He writes a letter called 2 Thessalonians. It's in our Bible today. This is what he said. He said, I do not want you to be, what's that word, everybody? Ignorant. I don't want you not to know this stuff. You need to know this. Here's what I want you to know. Concerning those who have fallen, what's that word, everyone? What does it mean to fall asleep so far tonight? It means you're dead. You have died. So Paul is saying now, I don't want you to be ignorant about this thing called death. Let me tell you something. Lest you have sorrow as others who have no. See, if you understand this thing I'm telling you, Paul's saying, you will have hope even though people have fallen asleep. He continues on. He says, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise. What, everyone? Now, who are the dead? We just were told in the previous part, weren't we? Those who have fallen asleep. So those who have fallen asleep, they're going to get woken up. Notice this. They're going to get woken up with the greatest alarm clock on earth. It's the trumpet of God. Watch this. It's the voice of the archangel. And with a great shout. It's going to be so loud it will wake them up out of their sleep. So Paul's saying, listen, don't be like the people with no hope. The people who have fallen asleep, they're resting until they are woken up. And then he says this, they will rise first, then we who are alive and remain, I should say, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus, or in this way, we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Is there hope beyond the sleep which is death? Paul says, you better believe it. Because the great thing is this. Did you notice he said that those who are dead will rise what? First. And then we, Paul saying, we which are alive and remain, the ones who haven't fallen asleep, will be joining those who have been asleep but have been raised, and together we all go on the journey together. That's incredible. Totally opposite to everything you've ever been told, but that's incredible. This is why the New Testament calls the second coming of Jesus the blessed hope. Because that's when the skies are no more. That's when those who have gone down rise up. Those who are asleep awake. It's incredible. But some will say, but wait a minute. Maybe that's just talking about the body. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the body. The body's just gone into the grave, gone down and rest, and we don't know anything. But we have a what, everyone? A soul, don't we? And our soul, that's see, okay, Robbie, you've misunderstood the Bible teaching on this, because there's a thing called a soul, and the soul is immortal. We got you, Robbie. Well, let's have a look at this. In the entire Bible, in this entire book, the word soul is used 1,600 times. Go count it. But you'll notice on the screen, not once is the word soul ever connected to being immortal. You know what immortal means, right? It means it can't die. It lives forever. Mortal, on the other hand, it dies. So this is interesting, because if you do a survey, in fact, there was a survey done in the United States about 4 years ago, no, before COVID, about 3 years before COVID, did a survey in the United States, and they asked a simple question. The question was, what happens when you die? And it was done by one of the morning TV shows, the breakfast shows in the United States. And you know what they found? 85% of Americans surveyed believed that when they die, their body goes to the ground, but their soul lives on. So where did that come from? Because clearly in the Bible it didn't. Because 1,600 times the word soul is mentioned, never immortal. In fact, notice this. Notice this. Paul says to his disciple, follower called Timothy, he says, listen, Timothy, he, referring to Christ, the holy man, he who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who, what's this word here, say everyone? Who alone has immortality. Now, if I said to you, I alone have $1 trillion, what am I implying? That there is no one else that has $1 trillion. I alone have that. So if the Bible says that Christ alone, referring to God, the Godhead in my business, referring to God himself, God alone has immortality, who else has it? No one. You say, yeah, but I'm sure I've read somewhere in the Bible that souls have immortality. Sorry, you didn't read it. It's not there. Because who alone has immortality? God alone. So then the question is this, well then what on earth is a soul? Because we all thought a soul lives forever, it's immortal. Let's have a look. To understand what a soul is, we have to go back to the creation story, because that's the first time we see the word. Here's what it says. It says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a what? A living soul. So man became a living soul. So here's the analogy that we get from this passage. The breath came from God into a dust-formed body. When those two things combined, it equated a what kind of soul? A living soul. That's what it said. Now, what's fascinating is people think that now, because we have a living soul, the soul cannot die because the soul is, what's the theory? Immortal. But let's ask a simple question. Can a soul die? Can a soul die? That's the question. Because if a soul dies, we know for sure that a soul is not what? Immortal. Does that make sense? Let's have a look. In Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 4, it says, the soul, this is God speaking in this passage, the soul who sins shall what? According to God, do souls die? Of course. But here's the interesting thing. If you look at this passage in other translations in English, this is how else it translates. The person who sins is the one who will die. Which word soul has been translated as some other word? Which word is it? So soul has been translated as person. Okay? Here's another translation. It is for a what? Man's own sins that he will what? He will die. Now, according to the Bible, can a soul or do souls die? Yes. What's the criteria? Sin. Let's continue. This here is a magical photo that I have taken with a magical camera, and what it's been able to capture, if you read the caption there, is this is a picture of souls. Now I have another magical picture that captured another magical moment of a boatload of souls. You don't get it, do you? You see, each one of these people is a soul. They became a living soul when they were born, or when they were conceived, more likely. Because remember the story of Adam? He became a living what? Soul when he was created. Because you need certain ingredients to become a living soul. Let's have a look at this. Death is the reversal of that process. Let me show you. In Ecclesiastes, that same King Solomon, he says, then the dust, referring to death, then the dust will return to the what? The earth as it was, and the spirit, and I'll show you this in a second, but it's the word breath in Hebrew, it will return to who? God who gave. Does that sound anything like what we just read in the creation story? Remember what it said? It said that he formed a body out of the dust of the ground, and he breathed from who? From God into the nostrils, and man became a living soul. But here, a couple of thousand years later, when Solomon writes this, he says, at death, the dust returns to the earth, and the spirit/breath will return to God who gave it. So let's look at it this way. We've already seen that if you have the breath of God and you have the dust of the ground, those things combined equal what? A living soul. But what we just learnt from Ecclesiastes is that if you separate those two, put the breath away from the body, you have death. Because the soul dies. Because what's a soul? It's a person. When you look at the Hebrew for the word spirit, when it says that God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, in other places it will say the spirit of life, it's this word rauch in Hebrew, which literally means breath. It's the breath of God. The spirit and the soul are not the same thing. What's a soul, everybody? A living person. What's a dead person? A dead soul. In fact, you ever heard of a thing called, in fact, your iPhones will say it, it has SOS when you can't get a signal. Have you seen that? You know what it stands for? Save our souls. Was that some manifesting ghost inside the body of the person going, save my soul? No, it was humans that got shipwrecked on an island saying, save our souls. So the soul is very clearly a person. Spirit is not a soul, spirit is breath. Let's have a look at this. God breathed the breath, or the spirit, it's interchangeable in English, into the man, and he became a living soul, or person, as we've seen. Now, the spirit and breath are the same thing. So spirit and soul, different. Because spirit is breath, soul is living person. In fact, let's look at it this way. Job said, first book of the Bible, as it was written, he says, as long as my what? Breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils. This is a Hebrew poem. The first line, that part there, rhymes with this part here. You get the picture? As long as the breath is in me, the Spirit of God is where? In my nostrils. Now, if we take the common interpretation of spirit, the meaning of spirit, what we would imagine then is some ghostly figure living up in our nostrils. But what's really in your nostrils is the action of breath. And if you don't do this, please. But if you want to test it, block your nose and don't breathe and see how long you live. Because as long as the breath is in you, you have the breath of God in your nostrils, which is a playback on the creation story. Is this making sense so far? This is why in the New Testament it plays on this idea and says the body without the spirit, and in Greek it's the word pneuma, which means breath. You've heard of pneumonia? I almost was diagnosed with it 3 weeks ago. What's pneumonia or pneuma? It's air. It's in the lungs. It's breath. And so the New Testament says, in a spiritual sense, he says the body without the spirit is dead. Which makes sense, right? If you don't have breath in you, what are you? You're dead. Let's put it this way. You imagine you got a bunch of wood or timber, and you got a bunch of nails, and you just put those two things together, and here's one I prepared earlier. You make a box. The box is made of nails plus timber together. We've got a box. This is the equivalent of there's the body, there's the breath. The breath's what holds it together. And as a result of those two things keep together, we get what? We get a soul. Does that make sense? Now, let's continue. Let's look at the Chinese for a second. Remember the Chinese the other night? Go to the Chinese. Here's that character for creation. Creation has a dust or dirt or soil, and it has a mouth or breath. When you put these two things together, you get this indicator of motion, which is a radical in the Chinese language. And so in the earliest writing of the Chinese language, they communicate creation, movement, motion. You end up with this idea that there's breath and there is dust together, makes this movement living thing. So if we look at it this way then, let's reverse it. We have our box. What's the box made up of? Nails and timber. But let's say we're going to take those nails out. Now what were the nails doing, everybody? Holding it together. Let's take those nails out. Let's do that. Take the nails out. Now our box will already turn to a bunch of nails and a bunch of timber. That's what death is. Death is the reversal of how life begins. In fact, there's an ancient Chinese proverb by, it wasn't Confucius, but this is what it says. That which is called death is this. Very wise Chinese saying, translated in English, of course. It says this. This is what death is, according to a Chinese. He knows what, everyone? Nothing. Is that biblical? You better believe it. What's the second part? And returns to the original state before he was created. It's the same story. Exactly the same story. In fact, every creature will die. We know that. And when he dies, he returns to dust. Is it clear so far? That the Bible has taught very clearly from the very beginning. You say, well, why should I believe it? I'll tell you why. Because we've just done 14 presentations looking at prophecy and how it is supernatural, and it proves that God's the author of the book. So if he's the author of the book, then this stuff is legit. So the question then is, well, this is a real downer, Robbie, because I've had this fantasy of becoming immortal. When's that going to happen? Is it going to happen? Because now you just told me who alone has immortality. Only God has immortality. And what do I have? I have a soul. But what happens to the soul who sins? It dies. And where do I go? I go to the grave. And what do I know? Nothing. And how long for? Till I wake up. Well, where's the immortality? Where's the good? I thought this was a message of hope. Let's have a look. Let's go back to Paul. Paul again speaking to that church at Corinth. He says this, for the trumpet will sound. Now we read that in in Thessalonians, remember? In Thessalonians he said, there will be a trumpet, there will be a voice and a shout. Remember that? And the dead in Christ will rise. Okay, so same picture, but he's talking to a different church. This is the church in Corinth, which is near Athens. It's on the other side of where Thessalonica is. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be what, everyone? Right. That makes sense. He's consistent with what he said, consistent with the Old Testament, consistent with what Jesus was teaching to Martha. It's the same story. He says this, the dead will be raised incorruptible. Incorruptible. You know what that means? It means there's no corruption. You go, well, that was genius, Robbie. That was really good English right there. But do you know what incorruption is? It means there's no corruption. You see, I don't want you to die, don't get me wrong. I don't want to die either. But I've seen a lot of people die. I've conducted a lot of funerals. And in rare exceptions is it young. Most deaths and funerals that I've been involved with have been old, thank goodness. Because we expect that, don't we? And you know what normally causes death when you're old? Something fails. Heart fails, liver, kidneys, corruption, cancer. Corruption. And we try to remember, for those who are left behind, we try to remember our loved one a bit before that last final moment, don't we? We don't want to remember them forever in that frail state. That's what corruption is. But what did this say? So we're dead, but we will be raised, that means woken up, brought back up out, and when we're brought up, we are in what kind of condition? Incorruption. That means all the things that were in the story of your life that brought you to an end are gone. And then it says this, and we shall be, what's that word, everyone? Changed. Some of you can't wait for that day. Then it says this, for this corruptible, that's us, this corruptible must put on incorruption, that's what we see up here, and this mortal, what's mortal mean by definition? You can die. This mortal must put on what, everyone? Say it with me. Immortality. Well, we have immortality. You better believe it. Do we have it now? No. But we'll have it on that day. We will have it on that day. Then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Immortality is about being put on at the return of Christ. That's that last empire. That's why the only thing we need to have with the last empire is really, really simple. It's this. It's all going to be better. But not before. No matter how hard we wish it. You know, I used to think, if there is some afterlife thing, maybe my grandfather went up to heaven, and because he was a good guy. It's funny, when we die, we're always good people, aren't we? But he was a good guy. He died. I used to think, because I wasn't a believer, I used to think, what if there is a chance that he's up there playing his harp, looking down and watching me doing stuff? I won't describe what, but doing stuff. What kind of life is that for him? My grandson, what are you doing? Not before. There's no immortality before. Does that make sense so far? So the question that I had, and I'm sure some of you have tonight, is, well then how in the world did we end up 2,000 years after this Jesus story with this belief that we have immortal souls? Where did this come from? I'm glad you asked, because I got the answer on the next couple of slides. We find evidence. Now, I'm not saying this is the start of it. I'm saying this is showing evidence of the trail. Tertullian was what we call one of the early church fathers. He was around 160 to 200 AD, so 2nd century, middle of the 2nd century. I want you to notice what he writes about the soul. Now, from the Bible, what is a soul, everyone? A soul is a person. Simple. When do we become a soul? When we come to life. What happens when we die? The soul dies, right? From the Bible, clear? Watch this. But speaking of death, this is what he says. He says, I use the opinion of who? Plato, when he declares every soul is what, everyone? Immortal. Now, I want to ask you really simple. You don't have to be a genius to figure this one out. Was Plato a Christian? Was Plato a Bible student? No, he was a philosopher. So what business does a church father have going to a philosopher and having an opinion on a teaching such as the soul when it completely contradicts the Bible? Now, you can choose to believe whatever you want to believe, that's fine, but don't call yourself a follower of the book. Because where the Greeks got it from was from the Romans. The Romans had the same belief, or the other way around. The Romans came after the Greeks. But the Romans had the same belief, that the soul is somehow immortal. The Babylonians had the same belief that the soul was immortal. The Egyptians had the same belief. And it goes all the way back. You can trace it all the way through history back to a serpent. Remember this from the other night? The great cosmic conspiracy, that enemy who sowed those seeds, that's where this goes back to. And I want you to notice this. You probably heard the story, right, of Adam and Eve and eating the apple, even though it never says it was an apple, but that's what most people believe it is. This is what it says. God speaks in Genesis chapter 2 to Adam. He says, of every tree in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall, what's that word, everyone? You shall surely die. You shall surely die. How many words, everyone? 4 words. You shall surely die. Are you with me? But what the enemy does, speaking through that snake, remember the snake is not the important part of the story, it's the enemy behind the snake. This is what he says. In the next chapter, talking to that woman who's standing under the tree, he says, you shall, what's that word? Not surely die. Now, if you shall not surely die, what's the logical conclusion? You're not dead. If you shall not surely die, you may be like a zombie or something, but you're not dead. There's something that lives on because you shall not surely die. God says you shall die. He says you shall not surely die. Now, remember the Chinese the other night? Remember this character from the other night, those who were here? This is the devil. In Chinese, if you write out the character of the devil, this is what you get in traditional Chinese. So the character of the devil is a garden, and it is a man, so a man in a garden privately or secretly. So you put a man in a garden, or a person, in our case we know more detail from the Bible. This is talking about the devil, so we know the devil was who? It was the enemy, Lucifer, showing up secretly in the garden. Remember that the other night? Cosmic conspiracy. Then we go to this character, which was the tempter. We saw this the other night as well. The tempter. You'll notice this is the devil, the character for devil. But the devil here is under a cover of 2 trees. This is ancient Chinese. This is older than the first written word in the Bible. The Chinese wrote they etched it into tortoise shells saying, this is what the tempter is. The tempter is the devil. Who's the devil? He's a secret person, or a person showing up secretly in the garden, and he comes under the cover of 2 trees, and he acts as a what, everyone? Tempter. You got it? We saw this the other night. Here's a new one for you tonight. This is the word for soul in Chinese. A soul. Now, what is a soul, everybody, from the Bible? You're all experts tonight. What is it? It's a person. How do you become a soul, everybody? Coming into existence. And what happens when we go out of existence? What happens to our soul? Our soul dies. Remember? Separation. Okay, you with me? Look what the ancient Chinese left written on bones and tortoise shells. Thousands of years before the Bible. Watch this. This is the devil. What's the devil again? Man secretly in the garden. But what's the devil doing with this soul business? He's speaking. You shall not surely die. Devil speaking. That's what a soul is in Chinese. This means we ought to be pretty careful when we're talking about this word soul, don't you think? If thousands of years ago the ancestors etched into bones, hey, when you say soul, it's the devil speaking, be careful. This idea of living forever. The devil's claim was, you don't really die because something's going to happen after you die. You will live on in some other state. Now the question is, why is this devilish figure, this Lucifer figure working through the snake, why is he trying to get, and he's done a good job, why has he tried to commit or extend a global lie? Why does he want everyone to believe that when you die, you don't really die, but the soul lives on? Why is that? I'll tell you why really simply. It's because the global deception is for global destruction. That's why. If you all think you're going to live on forever in other forms and shapes, come back as cows and animals, or go to harp-playing places or purgatory in between or whatever the thing is, you've all missed the point of the real story. There is an enemy of the author of this book. But then, how do we explain things like people who have said they've had a near-death experience? Maybe some of you tonight have had a near-death experience. Or the other one is an out-of-body experience. How do we explain that? Because that's one thing you've said, Robbie, from the book. But I have, what do we say it now? I have a lived experience. You've heard that before, right? Lived experience is far more superior to any fact. Well, let me ask you a question. What does that first word say in this 3-word description? Near. Which means you're near. Let's have a look. We have to remember something. From this book, we've looked at it 1,000 times already. What's the criteria when you're dead? You know nothing. This is Tutankhamun, by the way. Sorry, trigger warning. The dead know nothing. So how do we explain then this idea, this phenomenon, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences? Well, let's let the science talk. In 2007, excuse me, Time magazine reported on it says, "How does it feel to die?" It was an interesting article. And it's basically about near-death experiences. And this is what it says in essence. It says, physiological and neurological processes alter the state of what? Consciousness. What's that next word, everyone? Near death. These changes can indeed lead to altered states of consciousness, and in some cases to what, everyone? Hallucination or vivid experiences such as seeing lights, feeling detached from the body, or encountering visions. Such phenomena are often reported in near-death experiences. What the science is telling us now, as we're learning more about the brain, and we probably know very little about it in the grand scheme of things, but what we know about it is that there's some stuff that happens to this amazing machine you've got in your brain, which is your brain, that happens as you're getting closer to the point of death, meaning the oxygen levels are dropping, the different stress levels and hormones are happening, and it causes things like hallucination. This is not religious, this is science. But there's another one. In 2007, August 23, BBC reported on out-of-body experiences. What's that word, everyone? Recreated. Experts have found a way to trigger an out-of-body experience in volunteers that are still very much alive. Incredible. What this means is you may think you have died, something went crazy, but you weren't dead, because the dead know nothing. And doesn't contradict the science whatsoever. But what about reincarnation? I read a story, it was a funny story, it was a true story, but it was funny. There are a number of people around the world who believe that they're reincarnations of certain people, especially famous people. I love how everyone who's reincarnated, it's a famous person that they've reincarnated from. And so there's a story where they had, it was in London, they had a get-together of people who believe that they're reincarnated souls. Now, what's a soul, everybody? A living person. What happens to a soul when it dies? Well, I just said it, didn't I? It becomes nothing. Anyway. So in this particular get-together, there were people who claimed to be certain famous individuals. One claimed to be the reincarnation of Mozart. Another one claimed to be the reincarnation of Napoleon. Incredible. I mean, and they have vivid memories of being these characters. So they all get together for this sort of tea party, and the craziest thing was, you're never going to believe it, but 2 people walked in claiming to be Mozart. You didn't get it, did you? They both believe they're reincarnations of Mozart. They come to the same dinner and said, "I'm Mozart." "No, wait, I'm Mozart." "No, I'm Mozart." Something wrong with this. But what is the Bible's answer to this idea of reincarnation? The dead know nothing. But what's the Bible's answer? In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27, it says, "And as it is appointed for men to die 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times." No, once. Can you have reincarnation if this book is true? No. I'm not trying to destroy your worldviews at the moment. I'm just trying to enlighten you to the biblical one. But what about these haunted houses? Surely that's the real deal. Look what Job says. First book of the Bible. So he goes down to the grave. This is the person who dies. And does not what, everyone? Of course not. When does he come up, everybody? What have you learnt so far? He comes up at the last trumpet, right? The resurrection. So he goes down to the grave, doesn't come up. He shall, what's this say, everyone? Never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. If you take this book at its word, any time you have ever heard that a haunted house is the soul or the ghost or the spirit of someone who has died in that place, who has come back and is trying to solve their own murder or something, you can be sure that the person who died in that house, who went down to the grave, will not come up. He shall never return to his house, and his place shall never know him anymore. You can be sure of that. Are you with me? Isn't it amazing? Every one of these weird supernatural phenomena, we've got a biblical answer for it. So who's haunting the houses then? I've seen houses, I've seen curtains move when no one's in it. I've seen lights come on and off when no one's in it. I've seen stuff like that. I know a person, I've got a friend who was baking bread in an apartment in New York City, and she was making the dough, and as she was kneading it, she heard a noise. She turned around, she saw a saucepan floating in the air. She wasn't on drugs, just so you're aware, okay? She saw it. And she said, "What on earth is this?" And then, before she could turn around, the dough that she was kneading levitated off the ground. It broke into pieces, and it started trying to be thrown at her. She's running through her apartment, dodging this dough being thrown at her. How do you explain that? Because clearly, it's not the dead returning to their own house, is it? So what was that? I'll tell you what it was. We have this thing called spiritualism, which is about contacting the dead. But I want you to notice this. Again, I emphasize it again. What do the dead know? They know nothing. And they never again take part in anything that happens on the earth. So we get this really strong warning in the Bible about not trying to talk to the dead. And I'll show you it here. It says, "There shall not be found any among you," this is God speaking, "who practice witchcraft or medium," that means a person working through the dead, "or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are," what, everyone? "An abomination." That's the absolute worst word that God can use. He doesn't want you messing with this stuff. Not because he doesn't want you talking to your dead relative, because the dead know nothing. But this is why, and it's to do with the story of the woman in New York City. This is why. Why the strong warning? Because we're not talking to dead. We're not dealing with death. We're dealing with a thing called a demon. Have you heard of a demon before? A demon is it's a scary word, but literally all it is. Remember we looked at the great cosmic conspiracy the other night? Remember we saw that character called Lucifer? Remember he has that enemy attack on God and his family, all that business? Remember that from the other night? Well, all a demon is one of the angels who decided to follow Lucifer. 1/3 of the angels follow Lucifer. They are all in the category of this demon thing. Now, here's the reason why we're warned not to talk with the dead. Because first of all, we know the dead don't know anything. The dead don't exist. They don't come back until the last trumpet. So what the problem is that if you start going, "But I really want to talk to Grandpa. I really want to talk." Well, there's a great trick that these demon-type figures have. Here's the trick that they have. They are different to you and me. See, in the Bible, it describes there's two types of beings. There's a physical being. Look in the mirror lately. You've seen one. And then there are spiritual beings. Look in the mirror, you'll never see it. Unless you're in the nightclub in 2001 with me. I saw it. A spiritual being, so angels are described as spiritual beings. Here's what we know about angels from the Bible, really, really quick. This is a bonus. My wife says, "Stop giving bonuses out, you take too long." But this is a bonus, you don't want to miss this. Angels are spiritual. The attributes of a spiritual being are these. Number one, they can be invisible to our eyes or visible. They have that ability. Second characteristic, they are strong, super strong. You want to know how strong? An angel shows up in the book of Acts, and it gets a chain that the disciples are chained with, feet and hands, and my imagination, but he flicks it and the thing breaks. An iron chain. You say, that's not impressive. Okay, how about this one? In the Old Testament, one angel shows up, a good angel, and he wipes out 250,000 people in the enemy's army by itself. That's some serious power to contend with. So, visible, invisible, super powerful. Next thing is super fast. In the book of Ezekiel, angels are described as traveling at the speed of lightning. Now, that's the best a human can express it as. I saw them moving at the appearance of lightning. How fast is light? Come on, all you math and science people. How fast? Okay, you can't remember. Let me help you out. In a way you'll remember. At the speed of light, okay, some of you might be flat earthers. I don't want to offend you. But here's the deal. If the world is round, is that okay? If the world is round, at the equator, we believe 40,000 kilometers. Okay, at the equator. At the speed of light, you can circle the earth at the equator 7 times in a second. That's fast, right? So, my friend is making the bread. There's no dead person in the room because the dead know nothing. But an invisible creature, a demon, an angel, what do you want to call it? Can they see me? Can't see me because I'm invisible. I pick up the dough and I go, ooh. What do we see? We see dough flying through the air. Ah! Then I see over there a saucepan floating through the air. What's really there? Ooh. That's what we're dealing with. Now, you say, that sounds super silly. It is silly. Because if you read this book, you know what the story is. But if you don't know the book, you are freaked out of your mind. Remember, global lie is for what purpose? Deception, which leads to destruction. Let's keep going. Here's what Revelation says. They are the spirits of what? And what are these demons doing? Performing miracles, signs, things floating and through the air and all this sort of crazy stuff. Can I tell you another story? Is that all right? I have a friend in Malaysia. He's a Christian, godly man, knows his Bible. He goes to a village. The village has a witch doctor. Witch doctor says, you're a Christian, get out, this is my area. The Christian, my friend, he says, I've come here to share with them the message of hope. He says, do you have power? And he says, I don't have any power, but Jesus has power. The witch doctor says, I'll show you what power I have. He brings a bucket, like just a bucket out of his little hut, puts it on the ground. He fills it with water. Clear bucket, you can see the water, it's clear, it's empty. He says to my friend, name a fish. My friend goes, I don't know what the fish was, I'll make it up, but it might be mackerel. The witch doctor puts his hand into a clear bucket of water and pulls out a mackerel and says, I have power. Name another fish. My friend goes, I don't know, barramundi. He puts his hand into the bucket and he pulls out a barramundi. Now, everyone in that village was in awe of the power of the witch doctor. But not my friend. Because my friend knows the book. And my friend knows that probably this is the story that's happening here. Remember how fast an angel can travel? Barramundi comes from Queensland, North Queensland, somewhere, Darwin. So in the time it takes for this witch doctor to speak these words, the angel's gotten up, the demon guy, he's flown down to Darwin, put his hand into the pond, went fishing, pulled out a barramundi, flew back, put it in the bucket. If you don't know this book, you will be freaked out of your mind. You know this book? There's no. Let's keep going. 1 Timothy chapter 4. Now, the Spirit, this is the Holy Spirit, expressly says that in the latter times, some will depart from the faith, giving heed to what, everyone? Deceiving spirits, these are the demons, and the teachings or the doctrines of devils. Some of the stuff you're messing around with in your life today may be directly connecting to this part of the supernatural. Demons impersonate people. I've had many an experience where people have sat down with these seances and called up loved ones, and they're like, but they knew things about me that nobody ever knew. In fact, if you watch anything in American TV, this whole genre is very popular. The mediums, the spiritists. Now let me ask you a question. These demons are angels, fallen angels. They are invisible. Yes or no? That's what we said. Do you know that in the Bible, it says we have a guardian angel? That means a good angel is assigned to you for your whole existence. Do you know that there's also one that's not so good? So here's the deal. When you're 5 years old and you're stealing from your mother out of her purse, the bad guy knows what happened as well as the good guy. So now you're dead and your kids come along, oh, call up Daddy, I miss my daddy. Oh, Daddy is here. Oh, it looks just like Daddy. Yes, and I stole $5 from my mother when I was 3 years old or 4 years old, whatever it was. Well, nobody else knew that except my daddy. It's deception. This is what the doctrine of devil is about. That's why it's so important to understand that the dead know nothing. They return no more. Let's keep going. There's a really powerful story in the Bible about this. In 1 Samuel 28, it talks about a witch in a place called Endor. And Samuel is a prophet. Samuel dies. And Saul wants to have a message from Samuel. And he goes to a witch. And he says, witch, bring up Samuel. And people go, see? There is life after death. Yeah, but look what the actual Bible says. Sometimes you've got to stop reading what you think's there and read what's written. Look at this. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he, Saul, said, bring up who? Samuel for me. Then when the woman saw Samuel, now who's the woman? She's the witch. The witch calls up this spirit, and up comes Samuel. And she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. Because Saul was hiding his identity because he actually sent a decree to kill the witches, and she survived it. And the king, King Saul, said to her, do not be afraid. What did who? Did Saul see this? No. Who saw it? The witch. So then the woman said to Saul, I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. So he, Saul, said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul, what's that word, everyone? He perceived it was Samuel. Samuel wasn't called up because Samuel is dead. And the dead don't come back up. The dead know nothing. Are you with me? But people read this and go, see, Samuel came up. No, Samuel didn't come up. This is what the Bible is warning against. This is a deception of Satan. Let's go back and we finish where we started. Back to Bethany, 4 days too late. Jesus turns to Mary and Martha. Lazarus is in the tomb for 4 days, and he says, roll back the stone on the tomb. And they say, but wait, it's been 4 days, he's going to stink. Don't open that up. Jesus says, roll it back. Didn't I tell you? If you believe, great things will happen. So they roll it back, and when they roll it back, Jesus has said, he says, Lazarus, come down from heaven. Come down. I know you're up there enjoying the harps, but come down. No, doesn't say that. Lazarus, come up from purgatory. You don't know where you're going, just hanging out in La La Land. Come on up. No. He says, Lazarus, come forth from that grave right now, boy. When he speaks, the voice wakes him up and he comes out. And when he comes out, what it demonstrates is Jesus saying, listen, I have the power over death. Death is not the end. Death is a pause to your pain and your suffering until it can be solved universally. It's a pause. And what we see in this is a replay of creation. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. We end with this. In I like a bit of history. You've all heard of the Battle of Waterloo, maybe one time, between Napoleon and Wellington. And the battle was taking place, and it didn't look good for the English. But then the progress was being made, and across the English Channel they had these guys with flags who would basically Morse code across the channel to get messages from one side, from England to Europe and back and forth. And they start messaging, and they go, Wellington. I don't know what the flags look like, but this is probably it. Wellington, defeated, and then a great big fog came down on the English Channel. And so in England, what they received was Wellington defeated, and they said, oh, we've lost the Battle of Waterloo. And they started mourning, all morning. Yeah, mourning all morning. But then the fog lifted, and they got the rest of the message, which was the enemy. Did you get that? I know some of you are used to text messaging really weird with emojis and things. But the first part of the message was Wellington defeated, and that's all they had, and it looked like it was game over for the English. But when the message finally came through, the message was actually Wellington defeated the enemy. Does that change the message? You better believe it. And I tell you what, as we look at that cross, as Jesus has come down to say, I've got life, and I've got a life abundant and eternal to give everyone who believes, and then he dies on a cross, we look at that scene, and the message we see is Jesus was defeated. But on that Sunday morning when his tomb is emptied and rolled back, the message changes. He defeated death. And when he defeats death, he's defeated your death. The only question is, do you choose the gift?